Well, hi, everybody. This is welcome to the HTML and Bitcoin course, where we're going to learn how to do HTML in a Bitcoin context. This is part of the Pleb Dev course that is going to teach you to be a Bitcoin developer and make your first Bitcoin application. You guys ready to get started? Let's do it. First thing we're going to do is pull up this document on your computer. If you copy paste this URL and put it in your browser, you will get a copy of this presentation right on your screen. And that's going to be useful because we're going to be copy pasting some code from this. We're going to build a blog today about Bitcoin. And if you want to do that, you'll need to copy paste some code from this screen. The other thing you might want to do on this page is check out GitHub. This is a GitHub page that has all the stuff we're going to be doing on it today. A few example HTML documents. I'm going to go through what those do, and then the blog that we're going to make at the end. So let me tell you a little bit about GitHub, because it's important that you know about GitHub when you're getting into development. I'm only going to use GitHub in this example as a place to store these HTML documents, these HTML files. And that's that's like most of what I use GitHub for, is to store things that I've written. It's got a lot of other usages that another presenter later on will get into, but I just want to show you that, like, when you go to a GitHub page, it's a little bit confusing for people who are seeing it for the first time, and I want to explain what's going on. Like, the first thing you're probably going to notice is that there's this list of files, and so that might be a little confusing, because normally on most websites you see content before, and not like just a list of files. But you can just scroll past that for now and come down to this README. An important file in most GitHubs is a README file that is displayed below the whatever files are uploaded into that GitHub page. And the README file is like a graphical presentation or a text-based presentation of what they want you to know about this GitHub page. So here I welcome you to the course, and I link to the slideshow that we're using, and I explain a little bit about what these HTML files are. So if you click the blog one, I'm going to open that up in a new tab. You'll see what we're making today. We're making this blog about Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And I basically just copy-pasted some text from the white paper here. This is what we're going to build today. Oh, and at the bottom, there's a comments section. So we'll get into that. But yeah, that is what we're going to build. And then these other things are examples that we're going to take a look at. One thing you're going to want to learn to do when you're learning HTML is take a look at other people's code. So here's a page, and that we're gonna see how I built this later. And if you right click it and say view page source, your browser should have something similar to that, view source, view page source. That'll actually show you the HTML that I wrote here. I'm hitting Control plus and Control minus to change the size of the text so you can see it more easily. But yeah, like, you can see some cool text here. All right. So the next thing we're going to do is get into the presentation. So I've gone over a little bit about how we're going to use GitHub in this lesson and what we're going to build. Let's get into the lesson of what HTML is. HTML is a programming language that instructs web browsers how to display a web page. Programming language is probably the wrong term. I should call it a markup language. Programming is like something that can do calculations, and HTML can't. It can just tell you how to display images and text. And so this is what HTML looks like. If you see on the right-hand side of the screen there, there's an example of an HTML document. So that's what they look like, and we're going to make one of those. HTML documents are hosted on servers. Now, what that means is, like, when you get out your web browser and you're like, I want to visit, I don't know, twitter.com, Twitter.com is basically a server. Like, they're running some code online that's listening for your request, and it's going to give you some tweets when you access it. So that's a server. A server is a computer somewhere on the internet that hosts documents. And when a user visits a website, their browser reaches out to that server, like Twitter.com in this case, and downloads an HTML document from Twitter that contains some information. What does it contain? Well, if you went to Twitter, it would contain a bunch of tweets. You'd be like, display these tweets, to the user. And that's what Twitter would do. But different websites are going to give you different documents. All websites are giving you some form of an HTML document that contains instructions for your web browser about what to display. So that's kind of how the web works. You create these HTML files, you put them on a server, and then people can access them from there. At least that's a basic overview. There, of course, being the web, there's lots of complexities and nuances, but that's where we're going to get started by learning the simple way, which is just create a text file. It's an HTML document, put it on the internet, and people can view it. All right, so HTML uses something called a box model to display content. And a box model, it divides up the content that you want to show your user into different boxes and displays those boxes. So I've got an example here, and let's pull up this example. And you can do this by going to the GitHub and clicking the example 1 here. Okay, and you see that there are 2 lines, right? You see there's hello world and a second line that says this div illustrates HTML's box model. I'll get into what a div is in a minute. So if you examine this, you'll see that the HTML here has different, what we call boxes. Like there's a box called head, right? And it's got this thing called meta in it that gives some information that you don't know what that means yet. Then there's one called body, and within body, there's these other things. So two of the elements in here, 2 of the boxes, are called divs. And one of them says hello world in it, and the next one says this div illustrates HTML's box model. Now, why are they called boxes? Well, we call them boxes because, well, they're experienced as boxes when they're displayed in HTML. So, for example, you'll see that this one's stacked on top of the other. In the next example, I'm going to color these so you can see the outline of a box, the outline of a kind of square or rectangle. That is where it gets its name from. So let's just go to the next slide. Oh no, I want to mention first that each box in HTML is called an element. So some of the elements here are head, body, and div, and HTML, and doc type. Those are all elements. And most elements have attributes with metadata about them. So just as a couple of examples, the div called hello world has an attribute called class, which puts it in a category called greeting. And so that we're saying hello world, I'm going to categorize that as greeting. Giving things these classes or categories helps you later. And so when you write stuff, if you put it into a category, it'll help you later with like finding that part of the document and with using it in script and other places. But yeah, one of the tags here is called meta. That's in the head tag. Or the head element. Inside the head element, we've got a meta tag, and the meta tag has an attribute called charset, which is short for character set. This tells the browser what set of characters, what alphabet to use when it's displaying all this code. And we're using UTF-8, which is basically the English alphabet, or the Latin alphabet that English inherits. So that's what that's doing. It's like telling your browser that's what, like this attribute, charset, tells you what this document is written in. It's written in English, so we use the Latin alphabet. Up above on the top, we've got like a doc type element. It tells you what type of document you're reading, or tells your browser what type of document you're reading. And the attribute there is HTML, because it's an HTML document. So you can see how there's attributes and there's properties and stuff. Let's get back into this box model, and let's pull up example 2 here. And so I'm going to pull that up. And now you should see that there is a red section and a yellow section. The hello world part, this is basically the same as the previous document, except the hello world box has been colored red. And the other box, the one that says this div illustrates HTML's box model, that part's painted yellow. So why does this illustrate the box model? Well, now at least you can see boxes. Like you can see a red one and a yellow one. But this is showing you something about a div. A div let's go to the next slide. A div is a type of block element. A block element covers the full width of the page. So this is one of the very common types of elements that you'll put into an HTML document. A div, it might even be the most common. It's very widely used. And it covers the full width of the page. That's what makes it a block. And when you cover the entire width of the page, there are a couple of consequences. For example, you can't put anything like right next to it. You know, it looks like when you look at this HTML document, you've got hello world written there. Well, there's plenty of space next to it. Why didn't the second sentence, this div illustrates HTML's box model, Why didn't that sentence go right next to hello world? Well, it's because it's in a div. And a div is a block that blocks cover up the full width of the page. So since it's covering up the full width, it must go on a new line, and anything that you might want to put next to it gets bumped down to the next line because the hello world box wants to cover the full width of the page. You with me? Hope so. That's how boxes work. Sometimes you don't want to put your element into a block that covers the entire width of the page. Sometimes you want to have two things sit right next to each other and be in different HTML elements. And if you want to do that, we have inline elements. Inline elements have variable width, and multiple inline elements can consequently be on the same line. So if we pull up example 3 here for inline elements, we'll see we have inline element 1 sitting right next to inline element 2, and even though the code over here looks the same as the box one, as the one that's using divs, the difference is that instead of using divs, we're using this other HTML element called span. A span is the equivalent of a div, except for an inline element. So a span covers a certain amount of the page. That's why it's called a span. But it is not a block like a div. It is an inline element, and so it has a variable width, and it can cover different amounts of the page. So that's how that works. We've got inline elements with variable width, and we've got block elements that take up the full width of whatever page you're viewing. Some of the common, and all HTML elements are going to be one of these two types. They're either going to be a block that covers the full page, or an inline that only covers some part of the width, however much you put inside of that element. Okay, so see, these are some of the common HTML elements. We'll see some of these in the example HTML file that we've been using. There's doc type, which tells your browser what type of document you're using. There's the HTML tag, which tells it this is where the content of the page begins. You've got a head tag. Head tags usually have information about the document, like what character set it's going to use, whether it's designed to work on mobile or whether it's designed to work on desktop, although the default is desktop, so I didn't even have to put that in this example. That's stuff like that you put in the head. Another tag you'll sometimes put in the head is title. In fact, I'm going to do that. I'm going to show you a little bit about how to use GitHub right here, and I'm going to show you how to modify an HTML document so you can see what happens when you change it. So I'm doing this in order to show you what the title does. So let's go to GitHub, go back to the GitHub here, and I want to download this whole document so that I can have a local copy on my computer and change some of it. So to do that, I am going to click code, and I'm going to download a zip file that this GitHub page is all going to be in this zip file. All right, so I'm going to save this file somewhere on my computer. I will put it in, how about downloads? That's probably a good place. And this is going to create a zip file called learn HTML main. I'm going to save that, and now I'm going to open up my file browser, go into the downloads folder, and look for what I just created. There it is, learn HTML main. So let's unzip that. In Linux, you do this using extract here. You can also, it's going to be a little bit different in Windows. There's usually an unzip option if you click a zip file. But I'm going to unzip that, and now that created a new folder called learn HTML main that has the same contents that was on that GitHub, including over here, example 3. So I'm going to modify this example 3 right here by opening it up in a text editor. I'm using Sublime Text. You can use whatever text editor you want. Notepad is very common on Windows computers. Sublime is very good. A lot of people use Visual Code, Visual Studio. Find some sort of text editor that you're good with. You can just Google text editors, or if you're on Windows, you can just use Notepad. Your computer probably has a built-in one, but something that you can edit text in is what we're going to need. And we should see that same file that we were just looking at on GitHub, but now it's on your computer. You can change it. So that's kind of cool. Let's add a title tag to it. All right. So I'm just going to add title right here. And what are we going to call this? Let's call this document example. All right. So we're going to write the word example after the word title, and then we're going to close this HTML tag. How do you close it? Well, you you write the tag again, and you put a slash before it, and now it's closed. Like, that's the end of the title, all right? So let's see what that does. I'm going to open that file, example3 inline.html. Go right-click it and say Open with Firefox. That's a web browser. Web browsers know how to read HTML. So if I do that, we will see the same document, but now it has a title. Well, where's the title? You might be wondering. The title, in this case, since we put it in the head tag, is going to be up here in the browser tab. Actually, you see that it says example up there in the browser tab. Let me zoom in on it for you so you can see. Here's the browser tab, and it says example. The old version, the one on GitHub, it doesn't do that. The one on GitHub, this one, no, not that one, this one. This one has a different, it doesn't have the title in there. Instead, it shows you the URL that we accessed this document on because we didn't specify a title in this version of the document. How can you tell? Well, there's the HTML, and you can see there's no title tag in the head. But yeah, that's what it does. Like if you change an HTML file, you'll change what's displayed. So we added a title. It changed what's displayed in the browser tab right there. What else can we do? Well, let's take a look at some of these other tag types. We looked at meta. We looked at title. We looked at doc type, HTML, head, and body. I want to clarify something about head and body. The head is not displayed. Or stuff that goes in the head is not displayed except sometimes in the browser tab, meaning the part that you click when you want to go to that tab. Sometimes stuff is displayed in there if it's the title mainly. But everything else that you want to display on the page is going to get displayed in the body. It's like the body is most of what the user can see, and the head is just stuff that you want to tell the browser, like this is the language you're using and stuff like that. The next two tags on here are style and script. Those are something that my co-presenter Austin will present in the next lesson. He's going to go over style, and then later I will go over script. So we'll skip those for now. The next one is div. We've talked a little bit about div. That's a divider, a division of the web page that contains some material, and it takes up the full width. We've got span. I've shown you what that does. The next one on here is BR, which stands for break. Which stands for line break. We love abbreviations in HTML, and sometimes we abbreviate our abbreviations. So line break, it got shortened to break, which then got shortened to BR. But if you put a BR tag in your document, let's see what that does. I'm just going to put one between these two inline elements and save. What does that do? Well, if we go back to our example and refresh now, look at that. I'm going to zoom in for you with Control+. It made it so that they're on two lines now. So that's what a line break should do, right? If you enter a line break, you're gonna make a new line. Yeah, that's what it does. So that's an example of what an HTML tag can do. Here's another one. We've got a p tag. That's a paragraph tag. So let's see what happens if we add a p tag. I'm just going to add one down here, and I'm going to type some text. This is some text, and I'm going to close that p tag and save it. What does that do in our HTML document? Whoa, look at that. It added a new paragraph. What distinguishes a paragraph from a div? Some extra padding is what distinguishes it. This one, I'm actually going to color it. Let's color it so you can see where it begins and ends. Style equals background color. Oh, let's do purple. Purple's a good color. Save that. Refresh. So a paragraph tag, as you can see, it's a block element. It takes up the full width of the page. Consequently, if it can't go next to the inline element 2, because it needs to take up a full width, and part of that line is already taken up. So it moves down to the next line, and then it takes up that full width. If there was anything after it, they would bump that down to the next one. Another difference between P and div, a paragraph tag and a div tag, is that a div has no padding. And a paragraph does. So this is like if you're writing a document and you want to have paragraphs in it, you would use a p tag so that there'd be some padding between your paragraphs, and then you wouldn't display them like running into one another, which is nice. A div doesn't have that padding, so if you want two elements to be right underneath one another with no separation other than the line break, you can do that. Or if you do a p tag, you can give it some padding. which is nice because at least I prefer things that give me some padding and some separation between things. Well, it depends on what I want to do, though. Sometimes I want things to be right under one another. All right, so that's what a p tag does. And the next one over here is an anchor tag. Let's see what an anchor tag does. I'm going to pop one of those into our document. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to type anchor tag and close it and save. By the way, I want to mention one thing you might notice that this particular text editor is doing. Is one of the reasons why I like it is that if I type something like, a p tag, it'll automatically, when I hit enter, it'll automatically indent my next line so that my code looks pretty. And then when I'm done typing that, this is some text, hit enter again, and I start to close that tag using a bracket slash, it knows what I'm trying to do. Like, it's like, oh, he just opened a tag, now he's trying to close it, and it'll do that for me. It'll like put it in the right spot to make it all look pretty. It's one of the nice things about this particular document editor. Notepad, for example, doesn't do that, but the internet doesn't care what you write your documents in. So use whatever you want. Anyway, we put an anchor tag in here, and let's see what it looks like on our page. Refresh. Looks just like another element got put in there. I wonder if it is inline or block. Let's find out. How do we do that? I'm going to give it a color. So I'm going to add a style here, a style attribute. What style do I want? Well, I want to give it a background color of, I don't know, what's a good color? Let's do blue, B-L-U-E. Save, refresh. Okay, so this is an inline element. You can tell because it doesn't take up the full width, right? If it was a block element, it would take up the full width of the page. This is an anchor, so it only takes up a little bit. Another thing that's interesting about these, I just realized, if you the anchor tags, they can turn your text blue. And so blue is a bad choice of color for the background here because I want to show you how to turn the text blue, and that would make it just disappear. So I'm going to change it away from blue to green. That way you can see it when I change the color. So refresh. Okay, now it's got a green background. I said we can change the color of the text to blue. Well, how do we do that? We do that by adding a link. Anchor tags are mostly used in HTML to link to either some other document or some other part of the current page. And we do that by adding another attribute to the anchor tag called an HTTP reference, which, due to our love of acronyms or abbreviations, gets shortened to href. We put in an href, type in an equals, a couple of quotes, and let's add a reference to Google. https://google.com. Save. By adding this attribute, we made this into a link, and now the text is blue. Blue doesn't show up that well against green, but it's there. And if we click that, it's going to take us to Google. Check that out. That's kind of cool. Anchor tags. Why are they called anchors instead of like link? Might be a good name for that, you'd think. Or, I don't know, URL might be a good tag name. Well, they're called anchors because of another feature that they were actually designed for. When they were made, they were not. One of the things they were designed to do was to take you to a different spot on the current page. So let's say I'm going to make this document real long so I can show you an example. I'm just going to copy all of this, paste it 3 times, refresh. It's still not long enough. I want it to go to a second. I wanted some stuff that shows up below the fold, so we have to scroll to get to it. Okay, so now I've got a kind of longer document. I'm going to show you what an anchor tag was originally designed to do. This is also useful. Some people want to do this. I'm going to take one of these last elements here, and I'm going to give it an attribute called ID, and I'm going to call it, what am I going to call this? I'm going to call it something. The word something is going to be the ID of this paragraph. And when I refresh, nothing should change because metadata doesn't get displayed to the user. Attributes don't get displayed to the user. But what happens is that if I type in my URL, pound something, it's going to jump me down so that I can see that element that I added the tag to, that I added the attribute to. So this is what anchor tags were originally designed to do, is that if I take an anchor tag and make it say, let's do the top one. I'm going to change the href from Google to pound something and save. Now, if I refresh this, this anchor tag now won't take me to Google. It'll take me further down the page to where I can see, this last element that I added that attribute to. So those are called anchors, like a spot on your page where you want the browser to scroll to that spot and then stop, like it hit an anchor, or like you threw an anchor overboard and like stop it here. This is where I want to take the user. We use hashtags to represent those, and they're called anchors. So anchor tags are actually meant to take you to one of those, but they also work for taking you to other URLs like Google or Twitter or whatever. So those are what we use for links, is anchor tags, and that's where the name comes from, and that's why they're abbreviated with just an A. Okay, a couple other elements we've got in here. We've got H1. What does H1 do? Well, that's a header, and a header is something that you would use to make some bigger text and kind of introduce like a section of your page. So I'm going to call this one, what do I call this? How about, I'll just call it header. Header 1 is what I'm going to call this. Put that on a new line, save it, and let's see what it looks like over here in our example. Look at that, big old thing that says header right down there at the bottom. Headers have a bigger font typically, and that's basically it. Oh, it's also, I need to give it a background color so I can show you its box. What are you going to guess? Is it going to be inline or a block element? Let's just see. Style, background color equals, let's do orange. Save. We can tell by adding a background color that it's a block element because it takes up the full width of the page. Okay, cool. So the next one down on our list is header 2. Which is the same thing as header 1, but slightly smaller. So you can use this for subtitles, or for like if you want to give the title of your page, put that in header 1, and then the sections of your page, you can put those in header 2. You got some flexibility there. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to give it a color, style, background color. I'm running out of the primary colors here. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue. Yeah, that's right, indigo. I don't even know if indigo will work. Let's try it though. It did work. So there's header 2. You can see it's smaller than header 1, and it's got an indigo color because I wanted to show you that it's still a block element. Takes up the full width. Then we've got HR. This one's a confusing one. HR. What might that be? You might think, well, it's got an H in it. It's probably another type of header, but you'd be wrong because they did some really weird stuff when they were making this tag. Let's show you what it does. First of all, it does not have anything inside it, and it doesn't take a closing tag. So this one's already weird. Let's save, refresh, see what happens. That's just a line. That's what it did. It added a line to the page, and for some reason, they went with the abbreviation HR for this. Now, why'd they do that? Well, what that stands for is horizontal rule, R-U-L-E, because in British English, what we call a ruler, which is a straight line, they call a rule. So they made this up and they said, let's call this horizontal rule. All right, now we have to deal with British English being stuck in HTML. But what is it? Why did they do that instead of calling it like horizontal line? Because, British, they also have the word line, and this looks more like a line than a ruler. Well, they didn't do that because HL looks like H1, and H1 was already taken. H1 was, it's what we use for headers. So they didn't want to call it HL, because that looks like H1. They were like, well, let's call it horizontal rule. And that's where we ended up with. But if you want to put a line in the middle of your page, that's the one you use for that. All right, next one we got is an input. So let's see what happens when we put an input in our page. Input. And this is another one that does not take a close tag. Nothing goes in an input. But let's see what happens. Refresh, scroll down. We get a little box. We get a little box. And what can you do in this box? You can click it. And you can type some stuff. Type some stuff. This is, inputs are used for, well, user input. You got a user who's coming onto your page. Maybe you want to know their name. Maybe you want to know their username and password. Maybe you want them to leave a comment. You can use input tags to let them type stuff and then do stuff with the stuff they typed. So that's what that's for. And this one neat thing about inputs, they come with a little border. So you can actually tell on here that this is an inline element, not a block element that takes up the full width of the page, because the little border on it tells you where it stops. So yeah, that is that. Type some stuff. Let's see what happens if I try and pass the end of it. Type some stuff till I get to the end. Oh, look at that. It automatically scrolls for me because it knows I want to keep typing stuff. And there you go. It lets you do that. Kind of neat. That is an input. Next one we've got is a text area. Text area is very similar to input, but text area can have stuff in it. So let's put some stuff in it. Here is some stuff in this text area. Now let's close it, save it, refresh. And what do we get? Ooh, okay. We got a box again. And this box is bigger than the previous box. Also, because they're both inline elements, they go right next to each other instead of going onto a new line. Like most of the things we've been seeing are block elements, but these are inline. So this says, here is some stuff in this text area, and then it's got a bunch of spaces before it and a bunch of spaces after it. Where does that come from? Well, that comes from how I wrote this. You see, when I wrote this in this HTML document, I started it off with a bunch of spaces. And my text editor automatically put those in for me because it makes your code look prettier. And then I ended it with a bunch of spaces right here before the next text area. Text areas don't know that what style of document editor we're writing in. And so it'll take that text there, those spaces, and it'll display them for us. Other ones will like collapse them down into a single space. If you have multiple spaces in a row, HTML will collapse that into a single space for you. At least most elements will. Text area does not. Text area assumes that if you type multiple spaces, you want multiple spaces. And that's what that does. So I'm going to get rid of the spaces by just backspacing them and hitting save. When I do, it makes it better. Users can still type stuff in a text area. Stuff user can type in there. And most of the time, you don't pre-populate it with anything. Most of the time you do that. You have an empty text area for them. And then, well, my browser happens to save the stuff I typed in it earlier. If I backspace it and refresh, now it's empty. It doesn't come pre-populated with anything. And that can be nice if you want it to be empty for your user when they first see it so they can type a comment there or whatever. Just put an empty text area for them. Okay, so those are text areas, inputs. I think we're almost done with this. We got button and then image. So let's show a button. Button, submit might be what you have a button say. Let's save that and refresh the page. There's a little submit button. Once again, it's an inline element. You can tell because it went right next to the other inline elements. And if you click it, it doesn't do anything right now because there's no code that tells it what to do. One thing about submit buttons, and this is something you're going to have to learn when we get to forms, you need code. Like you need a programming language like JavaScript or something running on your server in order for buttons or forms to actually do anything. So when we get to the blog part, I'm not writing any code. I'm not writing any JavaScript. We're not running anything special on the server that knows what to do when you hit a button. And if you don't tell the computer what to do, it doesn't do anything. So nothing happens when I click this button because we didn't tell it to do anything. But yeah, that's you can put a button in there, and eventually in future lessons we'll tell you how to make your server or make your website do something when you press that button. All right, so image tag is the last one. Image, let's put an image in here. And can you put anything in an image? No, you cannot. You can't put stuff in an image. So we just save it and hit refresh. And what we're going to get is, well, nothing, because we didn't put anything in that. And you can't, in fact. But what you can do with an image is give it an attribute that tells it where to pull in the image from. Okay, so some of that might sound a little confusing. An image is not the same as other elements. It doesn't let you put stuff into the image and then put that on your page. It needs you to specify where you want to get the image from, and it'll go out to the internet or somewhere on your website, or sometimes even on your local computer. Take the image from there and display that on your website. So with images, you don't specify their content inside the HTML, like the content area, but you specify it as an attribute instead. So let's go to Google Images and find an image. Google Images. Let's find an image of a duck. Why not? There's a duck. Nice, pretty. I think that's a Asian duck. I'm going to put that in here. How do you specify it? Well, with the image attribute, you specify it using src, which is an abbreviation, imagine that, for source. Source equals, some quotes, save, and now let's see what happens. Refresh. We got an image of a duck. Look at that. And images are inline. You can tell because it doesn't take up the full width of the page. But if you put a really big image, then you could take up the full width of the page. You could like simulate and block element by just making the image really big. But it wouldn't always work because you never know how big your user's browser is. Anyway, yeah, so those are all of the HTML elements that I wanted to show you. There's a lot more, but I can't show you everything. So if you want to learn more, Google it. You're like, what are all the HTML elements if you want to learn them? But you can make a lot of cool stuff with just the ones I showed you here. So let's do it. Before we do that, element attributes. I've shown you a couple of attributes already, but let's go through some of the common ones. HTML elements have optional attributes that include style. We've looked at that a couple of times. You can use it to change an element's color, font, or size. You can change the size of an element using the style tag. You can give an element a class. This is used for categorization. One of the things that Austin will show you in a future lesson is that if you give elements a class, you can specify a style up in the head for that particular class, and then everything that has that class will inherit that style. So you can like make everything that has the class red, make it red, you know? And that saves you from having to write that a whole bunch of times. You can write it once and apply it everywhere, or to a bunch of places, which is kind of cool. It's also used for JavaScript hooks. When you use code, you need to, one of the things you want to do with code, or I like to do with code, is like grab something on my page and do something with it. Like maybe grab a form and take the input and do something with that. You can use classes to give your JavaScript something to hook into. Be like, I want you to go get the button that has the class of button, or the input that has the class of username. And then your JavaScript can like go and grab that and do something with it. But we'll show you that when we get to JavaScript. We have the name attribute. The name attribute is mostly used to pass form information to servers. So if you give a input a name, such as username, and then you hit the submit button, you can specify a server that you want to send that information to, and it'll pass them in these things called name value pairs. Like if the input has the word name as its, or username as its name, then it'll take the value of it. In fact, I'm going to show you that I'm going to show you that right now. That's my next example. Or no, I'm going to show it after I finish this. So the next thing will be what name does. I will give an example. The next one is ID, a unique identifier. This is used for anchor links. I showed you that earlier. I gave something the ID of something, and then it took me to that spot on the page. And then we have data. The data attribute is used to make custom attributes. So in this example, I show you data-foo equals bar. And if you did that, you could hook into something in JavaScript and be like, get all the elements with the attribute data-foo, and then do something with those. But you can make your own attributes, which can be nice sometimes. Attributes are specified inside an HTML tag. So here's an example. I made a class called Word. I specify inside a div that this is part of the class Word. I'm going to give that particular one a background color of red, and then I'm going to give it some text. I'm going to write the word text inside it. Let's dump that into our HTML and see what happens. It says I have a typo. What's my typo? Copy. Oh, that's what it is. That was part of the image one. Paste it there and refresh our page. And what do we get? Well, we get the word text with a background color of red. And if we examine the HTML, which we can do, it has an attribute of being in the class Word, which we might want to do something with later. All right. So those are those. The next thing is HTML forms, which is where we're going to get into what name does. All right. So one of the documents that I passed in is this fourth example, which is forms. So let's open that up in our browser. Open with Firefox. And we see a very basic form. I'm going to zoom in because it's so small you can hardly see it. All right. So what does this form do? Well, it wants you to type a username. What do we want a username to be? How about Smith? That's going to be our username. And then it's got this here. Doesn't even tell you what it wants there, but let's just type something. I'm typing some words. Now I'm going to hit submit and watch what happens. Something changed, up in the URL. Let's zoom in and see. Well, what happened is it took us to a link called login, and then it added this question mark and says username equals Smith and message equals I'm typing some words plus. Okay, so where's it getting this information from? Why is it doing that? Let's look at the HTML and see what it's doing. Go to here, open HTML example 4 in our text editor, and let's take a look. So what it is doing, we've got a little form here. There's a new HTML element you haven't seen before called form, and the form gives an action called login. What does the action do? Well, when you submit the form, which you're going to do using the submit button down there, it takes you to wherever you specify in the action. So here we specify login, it's going to take us to the page login. That is why when we hit submit, it took us here to login. All right, you with me? See that? Cool. And then what does it do next? The form action, when you hit a button called submit in it, it takes inputs and takes their name attribute, which in this case is username and message, and it stringifies them in a way that a URL can understand. So what does that mean? Well, it means it uses question marks and ands, ampersands. Here's a question mark. The first piece of information we're passing through this form is the input called username. Why? Because that's the first one, right, written under the form. It says input, username. So it's going to take that name, username, prepend a question mark to it, and say that it equals whatever we typed into that field, which is Smith. Then for every subsequent piece of data, it's going to do the same thing, but instead of using a question mark, it's going to use an ampersand. I don't know why they use question marks. I think it has something to do with them being variable. So like the server that you're talking to doesn't know what you're going to put into it, so it's a variable thing, and thus they have a question mark. But for subsequent ones, they are like in addition to the first ones. They used and to indicate it's in addition to. Not really sure why they did that. It's a plausible theory. Anyway, we typed the word I'm typing some words into there, and so it shows us those. And it has a final plus because in URLs, pluses indicate spaces. At least sometimes. There's also another thing you can do for spaces. But it's using a plus here, and in my HTML, I have a little space right there. So whatever we typed got added to that space. So there's a final plus on the end of it. You might want to delete that if you're going to do something else where you don't want an extra space in there. You can get rid of it. If we did that, let's see what happens. I'm going to refresh this page, and I'm going to type some words, hit submit. Notice it got rid of that plus. So if you change the HTML, you change the result. That's a nice lesson for you. Okay, so you're also seeing an error message. File not found. Well, that's because I'm not running any software that knows what to do with these attributes, that knows what to do with these, they're not attributes, they're, I don't know, they're data that I pass to it. I'm not running any software that tells my computer what to do, but I did tell my computer to load up a new page. Where did I do that? Right here in action equals login. I told it to go to the login page. Well, I don't have anything running that has a login page, and so my computer gave me an error. It said, you told me to do a thing, I can't do that thing, here's an error. So this is just another lesson. If you don't tell a computer what to do, it's going to give you an error, or it's just not going to do anything at all. Sorry, I did tell it to do something, but it couldn't do that, and that's why it gave me an error. All right, those are forms. Once again, you need to either run JavaScript or run some special software on the server that knows what to do with data, otherwise it'll give you an error, and that's what we just saw there. That's HTML. Or at least that's the building blocks of HTML. There's a lot more to it, but you can Google the rest. In the meantime, let's use the tools we've learned to build a basic Bitcoin blog. Sound fun? Let's do it. Open up a new folder. Let's not, I don't want to use the same one because the blog is already in this one. The finished product is already in here. So we're going to make a new folder. And what am I going to call this one? I'm going to call this Build a Blog. Build a Blog. All right. Going to go into there, and I'm going to create a new file. Create a document, empty file. It's going to be a little different on Windows. I think you say create new file is what it lets you do. Anyway, there's a way to do that in Windows by right-clicking. So if you're doing that, great. And I'm going to call my empty file blog.html. Okay, great. I've got a file here. Let's open it in my text editor. And there's nothing in there. Great, because I just created it. It's a new file, nothing there. I'm going to copy what I've got here and put it into there. Paste. And this is just the basic structure of an HTML document with a header tag that specifies the head or the name of this blog post, which is going to be Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And then we've got a div that contains information about Satoshi Nakamoto. Let's save that and then open this up in my browser. And what do we get? Well, we've got this horrifying looking thing. Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system with Satoshi's name on it. So far, so good. This is an HTML document. Don't worry, we're going to make it prettier in a minute. The next thing we're going to do is add, I think, the first paragraph. Yeah, okay. So the first thing in the Bitcoin white paper is its abstract. And so I just copied this directly from the Bitcoin white paper. And let's copy that, paste it in. Paste. It did some weird indentation here. So I'm going to indent that properly. Sometimes text editors get confused, and this one got confused, but it was an easy fix. HTML doesn't care how mostly it doesn't care how your stuff is formatted. Like it'll collapse spaces down and stuff for you. But some tags do. So the paragraph tag doesn't care how you format things, and so I like to make it look pretty and have like good indentation and stuff. Pretty to me, it's all subjective. But let's go back to our page and refresh this. We have our first little paragraph there specifying the abstract of the Bitcoin white paper. Let's do the next thing, which is we're going to give a subheader, header 2 I'm using for this, called introduction. I'll paste that into there. Save it. Refresh the page. See what we get. We got an introduction header. Yay! That's what the Bitcoin white paper looks like. Next, we're going to add the second paragraph, which is all about commerce on the internet. Paste it in, fix the indentation, and save. Go back to our page. We got more stuff. We're just building up the white paper page by page. I'm only going to do the first 3 paragraphs here because I think you get the picture. We're just building an HTML document by writing stuff, and I don't need to do the entire white paper to show you this example. So I'm just going to do one more paragraph here. You can get the idea. Indent that. Save. Take a look. All right, that's the last paragraph we're going to add. Yes, there's more to the white paper, but for your homework assignment, maybe you finish this and put the rest of the white paper in. That would be fun. Go for it. Last thing we're going to do, though, is we're going to add a comment section so people can comment on our post. I'm going to delineate the comment section using a horizontal line, or a horizontal rule, as the British people would have decided what we're going to call them. Put that in there. Save it. Refresh the page. Now we've got a comment section. And let's give the user a little form where he can submit his comment, or he could if we had anything running that knew what to do with the comment, which I'll save for a different date. So here is the slide where we add the comment form. And for each form input, I'm going to give it a paragraph tag right above it that tells you what you're supposed to type in there. So the first input, you're supposed to type your name. So I wrote the word name there. And then the second input is a text area. It's bigger, and you can specify a comment. You'll notice a couple of new attributes on here. We've got the name attribute, which would, if we were submitting this to a server, we'd be passing those name attributes. And we've got a class attribute, so we can give these things styles later. Once we learned that, which we'll teach in a future lesson. And then I've got a new attribute called rows. Rows equals 8. So let's see what that does. Save that. Oh, and we've got a button here so we can submit our info. Refresh it. And this is what it gave us. I'm going to zoom in on this so you can see what I'm looking at. We've got a comment section with a name. Let's call ourselves John. And we can submit a comment. This is my comment. But you'll notice rows 8. What does that mean? Well, if you specify a number of rows in a text area, it tells you how tall it should be. So if I do, this gives us 8 lines. Line 1 says, this is my comment. Here's line 2, line 3, line 4, line 5, line 6, line 7, and line 8. So that is how tall the box is. We can make more lines and it'll just scroll for us, but that'll display how long you want the thing to be. If we hit submit, you'll notice it didn't do anything because I didn't tell it what to do. And that is because I'm not using a form here. In my previous example with a form, I had a form element which specified where to submit this info to. And in this case, I didn't specify a form element. I just put the inputs in the button. And so now I'm not telling my computer what to do with this info, and consequently, it's not doing anything. That way, at least we don't run into any errors. If someone clicks the submit button, they won't get an error because they told my computer to do a thing that it couldn't do, but it just won't do anything. Austin will fill you in later. He's my co-presenter. He will fill you in later on how to do stuff with form elements. But the last thing is to make this pretty, because this is a very ugly web page, right? And you might not want people to view something that looks as terrible as this. So we can make it pretty real quick. And this is sort of a sample. I'm not supposed to show you CSS, cascading style sheets, or what I like to call the prettifying function. I'm not supposed to show you these because Austin's supposed to do that, but I'm going to give you a little taste just so you can see a little bit of what CSS does. Let's go to the top of our document and go to our PowerPoint and copy the next thing. Style sheets go into the head of your document. And we're just going to copy this, and I'm going to explain what it does after I show you what it does. So copy that, put it into your head right under the meta tag. Right there. Look at that. It messed up the indentation again. I'm going to fix that. Just HTML doesn't care, but I care, so I'm going to make it look kind of nice. Save that. All right. So we've got some stuff here, but let's see what it did first. Refresh. Whoa, that looks massively better. This is almost not hurting my eyes. So what did it do? Well, it changed the style of the web page, as the cascading style sheet's name suggests it might do. It changes the style. The first one tells it to change everything on the page. Just change everything. I didn't like anything the way it looked at all. Change everything. We specify that using a star. Grab everything on the page and do this to it. Box sizing is the first attribute in our CSS. What does box sizing do? Well, some of these elements have borders, like these ones, and some elements sometimes have these things called margin or padding, margin and padding. And when HTML sees that, it makes it like, it's hard to explain. If you specify that you have like something that's 50 pixels wide in HTML, and then you give it a border, that border is going to be in excess of that 50 pixels. So like this pixel looks like it's about 1 pixel wide. So the width of this element is not going to be 50. It's going to be actually 52. So this is the 50 plus the 1 pixel border on either side. That extra stuff, like which can come in either through borders or through margin, can throw you off when you're designing your page. It can make things look really weird. And like I specified 50 pixels, but it's not fitting into the space that I definitely made sure was 50 pixels in, is because you don't realize you have either some margin around it or a border. What box sizing does is it includes the border and the margin in the size of the element when it's calculated. So that now if I specify something to be 50 pixels, then I add a border to it, it'll like shrink it to make it so that the borders plus the content are a total of 50 pixels. The next thing it does, we have font size, which is easier to explain. I'm making it bigger. 1 EM is the standard size, and I'm making it a little bit bigger, 1.15. And EM is just a font size. You can use. There's different ones that HTML supports. There's the PT for point system, like what Microsoft Word uses. You can specify in pixel sizes. EM is what I'm using because it works well with mobile and desktop. I don't know. I think the EM stands for like the width of the M character in a letter or whatever. I just use it because it works well with mobile and desktop. And other ones get wonky where the sizes change depending on which type of device you're viewing it on. Font family is like what font I want to use, and I want to use Arial, or if Arial is not installed in the user's browser, use a sans serif font. A sans serif font is one that is smooth and bubbly and not doesn't have jagged edges. So that is what I did to everything. I just made everything use a pretty font. And then within specifically the HTML tag, which is this one up here, I specify that it should have a maximum width of 70 CH. I don't even know what CH stands for, but what it basically does is it makes the page small enough that it'll look good on mobile and still look decent on desktop, like thin enough. And then I added a padding of 3 M's and 1 M, or 3 M's on the sides and 1 M on the top, so that if you're on mobile, the text won't go all the way to the edges. It'll have this padding around it of a small amount. I gave it a margin of auto, which centers the page. It says like create margins on the side that are automatically set, and if you automatically set them, it will make them as wide as it can. So if it has margins on both sides as wide as it can, that pushes everything into the center, which is where I want it, because that looks good on mobile and on desktop. And then I give everything a line height of 1.25 so that it spaces out the text. These styles are things that I have found are visually pleasant in our current era. When HTML first came out, they much preferred serif fonts and small font sizes and like scrunching all your text together. It's just the style of the day. It's how white papers were written, and the internet was made by academics, so they liked that. In our modern day, we currently like this style, but you can make yours however you want to make it look. I like this. And then the next thing we're going to do under style is this next part. We're going to add this to our style tags. And what's it going to do? It's going to make our headers bigger than 1.15 EM. And it is going to make our inputs and text area take up the full amount of space that they can by giving them a 100% width. It's going to specify the height for the input of 1.8 EM because I think that is a nice height for that. And it's going to ensure that it has a 1px solid gray border. This particular browser automatically does that, but browsers act differently, so I like to specify that. That way they'll all do the same thing. And then we're going to make the text area's height change to auto. There's a little confusion in here, and I will explain that in a second, but let me show you what that does first. Then I will explain it. I'll change the indentation so it all lines up, save, and this changes everything down here. Well, it changes this too. So I'll refresh. We'll see we have a bigger header now, which is what I wanted. This introduction is bigger, and the comment section now, it looks nicer, I think, because the boxes take up the full width of the page. Cool. So what is the confusing thing that I said was there? The confusing thing, or the thing that I find confusing, is I have input and text area in this same element, and then I specify a height there, but then when I get to the text area, I change the height. I say height auto. So it seems like I'm contradicting myself here. I say the text area's height should be 1.80 EM, and then I change it to auto. What am I doing there? Well, this is a feature of cascading style sheets. This is why they're cascading, is that things lower down take precedence over things higher up in a style sheet. Austin will get more into this when he presents this, but I basically specified, like, I want all of these attributes to apply to the text area. The width, the height, and the border should all be the same as the input. But then I'm like, well, wait, though I actually want the height to be different. So I specify lower down that it should be an automatic height set by the rows attribute. And, well, I guess it's not automatic then, but according to the CSS, it's automatic, but the HTML further down specifies further. And that allows me to, like, make an exception because in cascading style sheets, they cascade downward, and things that are lower down take precedence over things that are higher up. By consequence of that, the comment box is a decent size. It still gives us 8 lines. Line 2, line 3, line 4, line 5, line 6, line 7, line 8. Still gives us nice 8 lines of text. If I got rid of that and refreshed, it would make it the same size as the name, which isn't pretty, because that's where I want the comment to be. So that is how cascading style sheets work in simplest possible explanation of that, or at least simplest I can get it. One last thing I want to do. No, there's 2 last things I want to do. Second to last thing is to do one more thing with CSS, which is to take the info attribute. That is something I set right here. Class equals info. See, and it has Satoshi's name and email in it. And I'm going to give that a style of, what's the style I'm giving it? I think it's text align center. Yeah, I'm giving it the style of text align center. What's that going to do? Well, let's refresh and see. as you might expect from the attribute's name, it centers the text. That's how it looks in the Bitcoin white paper, so I made it do that. But you'll notice that there's this little dot. And what does the dot do? That specifies a class. So I told you earlier that if you put things into a class, that gives them a category that you can write stuff in your head that says, like, do something to this category. Well, here I'm doing something to that category, and I do that using a dot notation. That's what CSS likes. All right, last thing I want to do is, if this was a real blog, you would want a way to go back to the home page and read other articles on this page. So I'm going to add to the top of my document a little navigation element. You haven't seen this one before, but a navigation element gives you a row of buttons that you can press to move places. And I'm going to make a button called More Articles, which is a link to wherever our homepage is going to be. Here I'm putting example.com as the place where we're going to take users. So we'll just pop that into the body right above everything else. And when we refresh our page, we see we got a link to go back and see more articles. So I said that's the last thing, but it's not done yet. There's one last thing within the last thing. I want to change that arrow because the arrow is ugly. And so I want to make a nice left-handed arrow. And I don't know how to do that in HTML, so I'm going to Google it. I'm teaching you how to do things you don't know how to do. Use Google. How do I make a left-hand arrow in HTML? And Google helpfully gives me left arrow Unicode right there. And the one that looks nicest to me is this at LARR, which stands for left arrow. So if I replace the arrow I drew with that, at LAAR semicolon, and save, let's see what happens. Ooh, it made it prettier. It made a nice little pretty arrow. And so this is me just teaching you, if you don't know how to do something in HTML, Google it. Like, how do I do this in HTML? And the internet will have answers for you, and you can use that to learn all the things that I can't cover in an introduction to HTML course. But yeah, we built our blog, and it's got a comment section that doesn't work yet. This is a comment. If we hit submit, it won't do anything. But we're going to learn how to make it do stuff in future lessons. I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you learned something about HTML. Couple of helpful tips. Learn the things you don't know by Googling things like, how do I do whatever in HTML? I especially like to include the website W3 Schools in my searches. So for example, if I wanted to learn how to do checkboxes, I might search Google for W3 Schools checkboxes HTML. If I did that, it would come up with this first result where W3 Schools, this great website, lets you actually try out, lets you see the HTML for doing checkboxes, try it out, and have a great old time. So I love that website. It's kind of how I learned the internet and how to make HTML. I encourage you to use that. It also has excellent tutorials for common HTML issues. Consider going through them step by step, or just Google them whenever you have a question. That's my final tip. I hope you've had a good time. Thank you for watching.